In some of my past written work, or more recently in my audio or video work, I've talked about the North American Counter-Strike scene as being tragic. I say that because when you look through the history of the scene, or if you think about the possible iterations of what could have happened if something changed at a certain point in time, it's very disappointing because it always seems like there's just this change that doesn't happen, this roster change doesn't happen, or this player suddenly goes on the decline, or some outside event like the iBuyPower max fixing scandal happens, and then that sort of hurts like this possible super team from coming into fruition. There's always something happens, and I think a good instance of this that hasn't sort of been well remembered is the fall of the Nihilum Gaming team in the summer of 2015. I think this has very interesting ramifications for how 2016 and now even 2017 by proxy or by continuation has played out in the North American scene. I think this is the fall, the failure of the Nihilum Gaming team is an extremely significant factor to how sort of the very upper end, not even just the middle end of North American Counter-Strike, the upper end of North American Counter-Strike, how those teams have been formed and how they currently perform to this day. And I think Nihilum Games is an interesting example, and there's also the sort of failure of, or the combination of Tempo Storm and Elevate, but I'll do that in a later video. I'll try to get that out soon. But yeah, for Nihilum Gaming, I guess the best way to start would be the history. So it's the Nihilum Gaming org, which has this name that a lot of people don't like to say, or they think is a dumb name. They started off in World of Warcraft, and then I think they got into Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm, and then obviously CS:GO. It was sponsored by Kinguin, so it had some capital. But the team that they picked up was a very, budget, quote-unquote, team. The team was originally Sanks, Automatic, Valens, Professor Chaos, and Flowsick. Now, not super well-known players today, mostly, except for Automatic and Valens, of course. But, yeah, not very well-known at the time at all. I mean, some of these players go back, like Flowsick and Automatic, I think, had a somewhat of a... He was somewhat present in 1.6. I don't know all the details of that. But, yeah, no, this wasn't a team that anyone had on their radar. And their first real appearance, the first sort of step onto the international stage was when Nihilum qualified for the ESEA Season 18 Global LAN or Global Finals or whatever that was called. And at that event, they first played Virtus Pro, and they obviously lost that, of course. I mean, that's sort of expected from a no-name North American team, but they sort of impressed when they actually found 12 round wins versus Virtus Pro on Inferno. I mean, that's still not a win. It's still a loss. But they maybe showed a little something there. But actually in their next match, in the lower bracket finals, it was not the lower bracket finals, but in the lower bracket, because it was like a best-of-3 double elimination tournament, which is going to be the format of this CSGO Summit, or CS Summit, or whatever it's called, coming up. So that's sort of exciting. But yeah, they played Cloud9 in the lower bracket, and they actually beat Cloud9. Now, Cloud9 at the time was, like, by far and away the bbest North American team, and that was exasperated by the sudden elimination or destruction of the iBuyPower guys with those bans, right, for the max fixing. I don't know why I have so much trouble with that. But anyway, yeah, so they actually defeated Cloud9 in that best-of-3, which is super surprising. It actually led to major changes in Cloud9. Sempus and Shazam were kicked to bring in Freakazoid and Skadoodle. Now, after Sempus was kicked, he decided to go over to the Nihilum guys who just defeated him, their team, to join that team to add some veteran presence to sort of ride the surging up-and-comers, as it were. So this was interesting. So the Semphis obviously brought some legitimacy, brought some interest in the Nihilum team, but was actually much more interesting is right after the ESL/ESEA Pro League Season 1 season started, that season started, Hiko decided to join Nihilum as well, which is a huge move because Hiko hadn't played in any team since he left Cloud9 in late 2014. He sort of trying to figure out his place in the scene. He was mostly just streaming, sort of waiting it out, trying to figure out the best move. And he actually decided to go to this Nihilum team, which is another huge endorsement for these young guys, these unknown guys. But the thing is with that is to replace the replacements were Flowsick and Professor Chaos. Now, Professor Chaos was the opera of that team, so that created some weird sort of imbalance, right? And this is why a lot of people, I would say, initially weren't super excited about Nihilum, is because just the roles didn't seem to work. You had Semphis, who was like an entry player, secondary opera, support player, and Lurker at the very end of Cloud9, which obviously didn't work. And then he goes a Lurker, Automatic and Sangster entry duo, and then Valence is like the in-game leader support player. So where was the Opera? Where would Semphis fit in? It didn't seem to really work just on paper. But if you actually look at the results, if you look at some of the other qualification tournaments, or if you just look at ESL Pro League Season 1 or ESEA/ESL Pro League Season 1, which is what they called it at the time, they actually had a very good start. They were beating teams like CLG, and they even beat Keyd Stars at one point in the season, and they had a very good start. I think they won a good portion of their early games. Because what happened was the roles actually worked out really well because Semphis was decided. It was decided that Semphis was going to be the primary opera of that team, which is not something he ever did in Cloud9. He opts sometimes, but it was, I don't think he would ever be called like a primary, this is your job and this is your job only sort of player. So what was surprising about that is it actually really fixed the roles. Now you have Sanction Automatic, who is there, sort of the young, up-and-coming, talented entry duo on that team still. Valence slots in nicely with the support player. Hiko, Lurker, Semphis gets to play the op role. And now you think that Semphis would be sort of the weakness of the team because he was never seen as like a top, maybe a slightly below average or underperforming or lackluster international player. But okay, now you go to the North American scene online, and then Semphis changed over the op, and then it actually works out really well for him. He was actually probably, if you ask an analyst today why, or you ask someone who's knowledgeable at the scene today why that team didn't work, it's like, well, Hiko couldn't carry that whole team. I think this would be a typical answer. But if you go back and watch the games, I think it was actually Semphis that was the star player of that team. If you actually look at the HLTV ratings, which I know isn't a very good measurement at all of how strong a player is or how well he performs, if you look at it from both EU and NA from that ESL Pro League season, Semphis was like the sixth best rated player. He had like a HLTV rating of like 1.2, which is really high. Now, okay, like Tarek was the second best player, like just behind Olaf Meister or something. If you look at those ratings, so those are completely skewed. But because the differential in competition, differential in what you can achieve in NA versus EU. So yeah, like it was like Olaf Meister first, Tarek second, Shox third. So it's like completely warped there. You would never put Tarek in that conversation with those players. But no, it shows that he actually was pretty effective with the op, and he sort of became the star player, making a lot of early picks. Like, I think Semphis's identity as a player is always sort of an intelligent player, a risk taker, who will try to do weird, unorthodox things to get an advantage, to use his brain to get kills. I think that's actually pretty well enabled by the op. Now there's the argument, like at a high-level competition, do you really want a player who's not super skilled, like Semphis is typically described, to have the op as a super expensive weapon? Okay, you can have that argument. But I think in the context of where Nihilum was at the time, it was a very effective change for him, and he actually had a really great season over at Nihilum. Now, Hiko also was performing pretty good. I think he was probably their second best performer. He probably was a little bit behind of what he was doing when he joined Liquid. He had a good level. He was never a star anymore, like back in the Cloud9 days when he joined Liquid. But he still has clutches. He still could perform. Now, he wasn't always perfect. He was still trying to, and he still to this day is trying to sort of figure out what his role is, how to figure out that lurk, and sort of the post, because I think that the identity of the lurkers and how the effectiveness of that position has changed over time is pretty dramatic. So he's still trying to figure that out, but I think he was fairly effective in this Nihilum team. Then you have Sanks and Automatic, who are more middling players, and then Valence was actually a very, very poor performer. And that actually sort of gets us into the weaknesses of the team. If you give it the strengths of the team, you say Memphis was performing well, especially well versus sort of these middling or very poor online teams. Hiko was a good safety net, and then you had two stable, good, effective players in Senks Automatic. But if you talk about the weaknesses of the team, I think the first thing you have to say. Oh, also you could talk about for the strengths is that Valens actually always been a pretty well respected guy in the North American scene with his tactics in terms of executes. That's why he still is has a position on Cloud9 today, or he had the position on TSM in the patch as a coach, because it's always seemed that he has a sort of a tactical mind for the game. Now, for the weaknesses of that team and why they weren't ever better than Cloud9 that season, I don't think in that Pro League season they never beat them, even in those online games. They never couldn't consistently beat Liquid. I don't know if they actually took a game off Liquid or not. And they couldn't consistently beat some of these better teams. But they're always in the mix of this top four, but they didn't look better than the other teams. Now, for the weaknesses, I would say the first is obviously Valens' performance as a player. If you go back and look at these HLTV threads for the post game results, it's always like the comments are always bot Valens or kick Valens or something like this. He was always a very poor performer. Now, he did sacrifice a lot. He would drop guns and play with the Tech 9, just use utility to set up the strats for his team. He's a very selfless player in that respect. But no, he was not a high output player in any respect. He was a very poor player, which is I think a noticeable drag on the team. Now, the other issue that I think people will bring up when they remember this Nihilum team is also the Force buys. Now, this was in the summer of 2015, so Fnatic and Envious were sort of very much in this Force buy era of play, or first buy meta of play, where they sort of tried to utilize their skill with the CZs and the Tech 9s and try to get an economic advantage and break the other team by just doing these force buys all the time and sort of winning rounds miraculously off of those, utilizing their skill. So this was an idea that Memphis seemed to adopt and bring into Valens' strategy, and I think I've seen interviews with Memphis that said as much, that he saw the strategy of those teams and try to integrate that into Nihilum. Now, that often went awry for Nihilum. Now, in comparison to some of the lower tier teams in the ESEA Pro League at the time, yes, they could abuse teams based off their skill, because you got to remember, this is 2015. This is very different. There weren't as many North American League of Legends orgs out there. There weren't these venture capital backed orgs like Splice and Immortals and NRG out there buying up good talent and international talent. The state of the scene was, I think, noticeably, significantly weaker, less established, less funded, less polished. So yeah, I think at the time that while the strategy could work, I guess, versus certain teams, in general, this was a very frequent criticism of the team, that they force buy too often. They made poor economic decisions. They ended up force buying themselves again and again, just being in a perpetual hole and never getting anything done, just being stubborn. So those were some issues, but I think if you look at the results, they were pretty decent. It looked like they were going to go to that first ESL Pro League Season 1 LAN. But if you look at the results, they actually only won 2 of their last 7 games, and they missed the playoffs by 1 game, or missed the attending the LAN by 1 game in the record. Their record was 13-8, and then the worst performing team that actually attended the LAN had a record of I think their record was 13-9, and this other team had a 14-8 record. So they were very close, and they just 2 of the last 7 games, that's pretty poor when you consider they only had 9 losses overall. They lost 5 games in that last 7-game stretch. So what happened there? Was this tragic sort of odd, they had these, they had some issues. They weren't, let's not pretend they're going to be some superstar team. They had this unlimited potential. They had their issues, and they obviously didn't have the most skill in the world, but they looked decent, looked capable. But the issue was, it seemed like there was a very, very potent, very prominent internal issue between Automatic and Hiko. Now, if you look at some of the CT positions that Hiko and Automatic played, those sort of clashed. And you also think that remember that Automatic was not sort of the entry player that he is currently on Cloud9, or like aggressive rifle player that he is on Cloud9 on the T side. He wasn't always like that in Tempo Storm and TSM and Complexity. He was very much a lurk player, very much a dedicated lurk player, which is, of course, an identity attached to Hiko. He's sort of the famous North American lurk player. So it was publicly said in the press release that Automatic was trying to be made into a support player, and he wanted to be more of a star player. I don't know how true that is, or how they framed that, or if that was just something they said to the outside world. But in the Hiko Reflections interview, he said something really weird, like, well, Hiko and Cephas were friends, and Cephas and Automatic were friends, so when there was a conflict between them, like, Automatic took the friendship between Hiko and, like, just these weird internal politics. It seems so strange to break up a team over. Anyway, but yeah, Automatic actually ended up leaving that team like 2 games before the end of the season and joining Tempo Storm. Now, that also sort of led to sub-poor results in ESL Pro League and elsewhere. They didn't make that land because of a really poor finish to their season. They picked up Desi to replace Automatic, so maybe that's not a super big downgrade. Maybe today you think of Desi as a super big downgrade from Automatic, but back then I think the reputation of both players was obviously significantly different. Now, after Automatic left, like very quickly after Automatic left, there was this weird thing where Nihilum Gaming as an org actually fell apart, and they weren't playing apparently they weren't playing the guys on the team because their sponsorship from Kingwin somehow fell through, and that led to just the breakup of the Nihilum Gaming organization in total. I mean, if you look at their Twitter, if you look at their website, they've been defunct for quite a while now. But anyway, yeah, this actually led to the Nihilum guys adopting this name Maximum Effort and trying to qualify for the next major. Actually, they're qualifying for the main qualifier for the major. I think this was ESL 1 Cologne 2015. So they actually failed that as Maximum Effort, and they failed to qualify for another SEVO season as Maximum Effort. And this name, I know, is a callback to a name that Cephas and Sean Garrett's, I think, Swag used at the very end of 1.6. But it almost seems like, from what I saw publicly at the time, it almost seemed like a in-joke that they were calling themselves Maximum Effort. If you actually look at the Hiko interview, that Second Reflections Hiko interview, I'll put that in the description box below with a timestamp. He actually couldn't even remember who the 5th was that replaced Automatic. He couldn't remember that Desi was the replacement. So I have to believe, I mean, I know I'm really speculating now, that they didn't practice much, and it seemed like that was sort of the implication publicly, that they weren't putting in their maximum effort, that this was sort of like a slide joke, that they were sort of trying to figure out their identity of the team. They were trying to switch roles around. They were trying to figure that out. I think at one point it was like Cephas would go off the op, and like Sanks was instead of going to go to the op. Something weird like this was trying to be figured out at that time. So yeah, this fall, the Nihilum Gaming, or this internal issue, sort of led to the decline. And of course, about a month after Automatic left, Hiko decided to leave Nihilum. So this was sort of like one of their key strengths left. Nihilum, or Maximum Effort, decided to join Complexity. They picked up Roca, and they actually brought in back Automatic, who also went to Tempo Storm. Both players were on Tempo Storm. So once Hiko left, Automatic came back. So maybe this again points at the tension between the two players. So yeah, it just sort of nothing happened. Now, Complexity was a decent North American team online, maybe like the 5th best North American team, right behind or right alongside Conquest. And then that Complexity team sort of disbanded when Fraud was added to the team. I should also say that Valens played as a player on that team for a while, but then decided to step back and retire. And then it was Warden who joined that team and to replace Valens. But Fraud was added to that team. That sort of led up to the breakup of the team. Automatic Cephas decided to join TSM. Valens came out of retirement, joined the team as a coach, and that sort of led to the new iteration of Nihilum, but it's obviously very depleted now, and they brought in Sick, Twist, and FNS. Well, originally it was Vice, but later Twist into TSM. So this team sort of, they they stuck together to some degree, but their initial promise, their greatest opportunity to have an impact with Hiko just didn't go anywhere, and that the complexity team also didn't go anywhere. Now the TSM actually had that surprise result at ECS, but not. I mean, they won a best of 1 versus Astralis and best of 3 versus Cloud9. I mean, that's okay. That shows some promise. They were able to compete versus some of the better international teams, or some of the best international teams on Cobblestone. So that was good. But generally, this Nihilum Gaming team sort of lost their opportunity to show up in this 2015 summer period. With Hiko, and Hiko, of course, had great results with Liquid. Went to major semifinals. Actually, made it the major final of the ESL 1 Cologne 2016 major with Simple in the lineup, of course. So there's these players in the team that achieved, and of course, Automatic did very well with Cloud9 towards the end of 2016 after he left TSM. Won ESL Pro League Season 4 finals, and with him as being the MVP of the team. Now he's like the second best player of that team with Stewie 2K, and those two is sort of a duo. So this is sort of there's all these success elsewhere after, and now Valens is also on Cloud9. So there's all this success, all these upgrades, all these players are moving up after Nihilum, or they had better results later after Nihilum, but when they were together, when they probably had the best roster potential, they didn't actually do anything. So this is sort of a disappointing thing, and it also has major ramifications for how the scene played out. Just imagine if that internal issue didn't happen within Nihilum. They were able to attend the LAN and maybe do well enough, maybe not get into the playoffs or win it, but maybe do well enough where they think, okay, let's keep together for a few more months. I mean, think about the possible ramifications. Well, there's obviously the Hiko Liquid issue, that Hiko wouldn't have gone to Liquid, and that might have screwed up that team, and they wouldn't be able to compete and do well, and maybe they wouldn't. Okay, think about the reason that Simple joined Liquid in the first place was, or a part of the reason is because the relationship Hiko and Simple seemed to have formed during when Hiko stood in for Flipside at that ESWC in the summer of 2015. That sort of it seemed to be an influence between Liquid picking them up. Now think about what if the Nihilum guys stick together on Complexity or TSM or whatever, and then it was actually Simple that went to TSM or Nihilum or Complexity. That could have been very interesting. Also got to think, Valens left Complexity in sort of the late fall of 2015, sort of going into the winter of that year. Sort of a winter is I think end of November, or maybe I think mid-November was about when he left this team. Might have been a little earlier, but anyway, think about who was rising in the scene at the time, and who's very much connected to the career of Automatic. It's Stewie 2K. Okay, think about this combination. What if the Complexity team, instead of having Sanks and Automatic as the sort of the aggressive entry duo, it was Stewie 2K and Automatic. Sanks moves back to a more supportive position. He's sort of the weak link. He's a player that didn't sort of do anything after the Complexity team sort of broke up with the introduction of Fraud, and he didn't do much with Muffin Lightning. That's sort of like a weird choke team, right? That sort of somehow made it to the Third America's minor. But anyway, if they asked Sanks to be a support player, then the Automatic Stewie 2K duo that's doing so well in Cloud9 that can do well internationally could have been on this Nihilum team. Then you have Hiko, who's still performing pretty well at his typical lurk role, and Semphis as sort of a decent, sometimes good, sometimes pretty bad opper, but has been able to show himself internationally. Like there was that game versus Fnatic on Mirage at the E-League Season 1 thing. Okay, the E-League Season 1 was pretty bad for Semphis, but part of that was the introduction of Katie, and because Twist was out of age. Okay, we're getting off topic. But, think about this. What if Stewie 2K never joined Cloud9? What if Simple never joined Liquid? What if those two players could have realistically joined the Nihilum core if Hiko stayed, or if, Valens left the right time and the contracts were available? That Automatic could have asked or tried to gotten his friend Stewie 2K into the team. That could have been very interesting. I mean, this has major ramifications to how 2016 would have played out in the North American scene. And you could think about also the Optic Gaming organization. What if What if Nihilum stick together? And I mean, this is a lot less crazy than the addition of Stewie 2K and Simple, was just sort of these very bizarre, very, not, I mean, you can argue with Simple that it was expected that they have better results with Simple, but Stewie 2K was very much a gamble and a risk, and not, maybe teams wouldn't have made that gamble. But think about Arctic Gaming. They decided to pick up the fourth best North American team at the time, at the very beginning of 2016. Now, what if that was Complexity or Nihilum instead, with Hiko still in the lineup? If Hiko gave them the boost to be better than Conquest still? What if that, that could have had major ramifications. Now they would have the backing of Optic going into 2016. And think about the pickups they could have made with Optic Gaming? Like, Optic Gaming made two good pickups that sort of helped the core of the Conquest lineup become a very good team in 2016. Now the switch over from Daps to Stanislaw as an in-game leader also helped, but the sort of the stars that they brought in, or the semi-stars that Optic was able to bring in, obviously very helped that team. What if Optic brought in Simple for the Nihilum guys, or what if they if they needed Stewie 2K and Stewie 2K was on Cloud9 and Optic decided to grab Stewie 2K from them with their funding? This could have been a very dramatic. This would obviously very dramatically shifted the course of North American Counter-Strike. Now, would it have been better or worse? Okay, maybe Liquid would be better suited to handle Simple. And if you think about if there's that crazy scenario of Simple, Semphis, and Stewie 2K are on the same team, that's obviously a recipe for disaster with the personalities. But this could have been a very different scene. It could have been, there's very intriguing possibilities that just didn't happen for whatever reason. Just this bad luck of the internal issues in Nihilum and the destruction or the fall of the Nihilum Gaming organization. So pretty interesting possibilities, I think. All right, thanks.